Hey folks, Ori here. Got an interesting video for you guys. It's gonna be the 9.2 tier set, and we're going to be discussing it from a Ret Paladin perspective and a little bit of speculation that I have going forward based on the information that we currently have available to us. Obviously, as more PTR stuff comes available and we can actually get into the PTR and test this, and brighter people than me start doing the theory crafting, then obviously I will do an updated thing closer to the time. Needless to say, that does mean that this video is very, very, very spoiler heavy in terms of the tier set bonuses and things like that. So if you don't want any 9.2 speculation based on the information I currently have at hand, then obviously this video isn't for you guys. I cannot state this enough. I don't want anyone peeved off at me because I've spoiled something for them. Because as an avid book lover and fantasy man, I know that spoilers aren't always warranted. So, you have been warned. Now, let's get into the main part of it then. So, for those of you that don't know, what are the Ret Paladin tier set bonuses as they currently stand? Well, first off, called Ashes to Ashes. So, as you can probably already guess, it's going to be related to our Ashen work in some way. And maybe Ashen Hallow, but given how Ret Paladins don't go vent there, highly unlikely. So, the two set. When you benefit from Art of War, which is our proc that resets Blade of Justice, you gain Seraphim for 2 seconds. Now, that in and of itself sounds okay. Like Seraphim, it's a big thing, we use it for our buffs. Unfortunately, 2 seconds for a duration is pretty crap. The reason for that is because 2 seconds is going to be a global, 2 if you're lucky. But Art of War procs off our auto swings, off our auto attacks. So that means that the tier 2 set essentially will bring back into a playstyle and a skill set much like seal twisting from the old days. If you're a much older Ret Paladin, you may remember that, or if you attempted seal twisting in Classic and or TBC. Obviously, more experienced Paladins will be able to give you more information on seal twisting if you want, but it's not fun. It kind of means that you're constantly second guessing your auto attack swings to see if they're going to proc it, so you can make use of it, which for 90% of the player base is going to mean that essentially this Seraphim 2 second thing is just going to be, oh, that's cute, this Crusader Strike gets buffed, and or maybe a Spender if it just happens to fall on that. Not great. I think if they want us to have Seraphim and for it to feel impactful, it'd have to be 3 or 4 seconds, or alternatively they should change it from Seraphim to your next ability does X and it is a charged use. So you can only have, say, 1 charge of it at any time, and your next damaging ability does X, or benefits from Seraphims. Wording it something like that might be better if that's what they're trying to do. The 4 set, Art of War now has a 50% chance to reset the cooldown of Wake of Ashes instead of Blade of Justice. This is horrible. Because Art of War now has a 50% chance to proc either, or to refresh either, Blade of Justice or Wake of Ashes. Now, with our current playstyle, if it refreshes Wake of Ashes, we're not likely to want to use Wake of Ashes within our current playstyle unless this reset occurs within 15 seconds of us using our old Wake. Otherwise, we may run the risk of having to hold this Wake of Ashes reset so that it lines up with Seraphim and Divine Toll and Final Reckoning or something like that. But at the same time, obviously this is Blizzard's attempt at giving us more holy power, because obviously Wake of Ashes generates 3 holy power when used, rather than the 2 that Blade of Justice provides. So Art of War essentially has a 15% chance to reset the cooldown on an ability that will give us a little bit more holy power. Now, and if we take that kind of mentality as though Blizzard is attempting to give us more holy power, then we can kind of look further into what Blizzard's intentions are for improving our DPS. Like, why are they doing this? And after reading the various paladin discords and seeing what other paladin content creators have to think, on top of my own kind of conclusions from this over the last couple of days since the announcement, I feel like they're trying to improve our single target DPS, our sustained DPS no less, and they're trying to pull us away from the 1 minute burst cycle that we currently have, which means that we may actually see a meta shift, as it were, from Kyrian Paladins to another Covenant. And the reason for that is because if we do move away from the likes of Execution Sentence, and potentially even away from Final Reckoning, then we end up in a position where we're also losing benefit from Divine Toll, because one of the reasons why Divine Toll is so strong is because of the 1 minute build and how everything lines up. You hold Seraphim and Wake for 45 seconds, or for the 15 seconds difference between the two, and then every minute you have this go. Probably still going to be seen in some aspects of PvP, and we may still use Final Reckoning, but it may become more about having that burst when we need it, or just utilizing the AoE damage provided by it during those bursts, and less about having to line everything up in one go. And if it's a case of using everything as it's on cooldown, then we may see Necrolord or Night Fae potentially take the front seat. The reason for this, and the reason my speculation is coming through as this, is if we quickly look at Blood Mallet, the Mythic Plus side of things may be a little bit hazy. We may still keep Kyrian, although I'm still of an opinion that we might actually go Duty-Bound Gavel because of how that interacts, and it'll give us that easier transition between the two, because the way that the legendary system works going in 9.2 is we will get a second legendary, but that second legendary is always going to be our Covenant legendary. So we're always going to have Divine Resonance, Duty-Bound Gavel, Radiant Embers, or Season of Plenty on a slot. And then the second legendary that we can equip for Mythic Plus or for single target will be Tempest of the Lightbringer for M+, and or Final Verdict for single target. Now, the fact that Final Verdict will be the one of choice very much plays into Necrolord quite well, because Final Verdict replaces Templar's Verdict with Final Verdict, which is a stronger attack, but also has a 15% chance to activate Hammer of Wrath and reset its cooldown. This allows its use, regardless of the target's health, generating us more holy power, and feeds into this more sustained build of constantly having spenders. It is still proc-based, but with enough of them, it becomes a lot easier to play through. Now, I do have my Paladin in the Necrolord zone, so we can play through a couple of target dummies in a moment, because I'll explain where my logic is with this. Also going through some fights from yesterday. Now, why do I think that Necrolord might see its use? Because looking at the current sims based on the information that we currently have and going off the 9.1.5 data values, obviously Necrolord isn't great. And if we bring up two different fights, this is Sanctum of Domination, Guardian of the first one's Mythic. It's a single target fight, pretty straightforward, there's not too much to worry about, and it's kind of just a DPS race. I have set the parameters for this to be 9.1.5, between 248 to 250 item level, because unfortunately that is the highest item level of the Necrolords that have completed this fight on a log. And you can see that they're still running the 1 minute build in their talents. They are using Marilith as the soulbind because of the mastery and the Kevin's Ooze that they summon as part of their capstone trait, because whenever they use Vanquish's Hammer, the target takes a 6% increased damage from them. Vanquish's Hammer giving 2 charges of this, which means that they're going to be able to rotate this every 20-ish seconds. They're going to be able to keep this 6% damage buff on their target for an extended period of the fight. I don't currently have the legendary crafted. I'm currently earning gold. I do have the renown for it, but my account is a little bit on the skin side because, you know, legendaries ain't cheap. But the difference between the same item level DPS at the moment, 10,747 DPS for a 250 item level Necrolord Retribution Paladin single target fight against an 11,000, 1,200, 1,200? Teeth back in. 11,212.3 DPS. That difference is approximately 4.5%, which isn't too much. If we then look at the fight times, so rather than just picking the very, very top, you have a 4-minute, 54-second fight timer, and if we bring it down to the 4-minute 52 timer, you can see that the DPS of another paladin is 10,893.9. That closes the gap even further. So we're within a few percent as things currently stand. Now, that is with Execution Sentence currently being the most dominated or most dominant PvE single target talent. Now, this is all on the hold side of things. But with the tier set changing it, so that Art of War has a 50% chance to reset the cooldown of Wake of Ashes, there are 2 builds that I suspect may become viable and may push Paladins into Necrolord. And if we look at my Paladin, the 2 builds I think that we may see are a build like this, running Zeal. Well, Zeal and or Righteous Verdict can be moved around here. We'll say Final Verdict because we're pushing pure single target. There's no aspects of cleave. The Zeal actually, yeah, we'll talk about the Righteous Verdict build, and then we'll talk about the Zeal build and the problems that the Zeal build may have, or the benefits it may have. Having Righteous Verdict and Divine Purpose means that you're pumping more Templar's Verdicts into the target. You have the more holy power, you are keeping this buff up. Now, if I can bring up... let's go to a target dummy. Refresh this. Now, this particular build will take some getting used to, because we're not having to hold anything. This is going to be a case of every time Wake is available, as long as you don't cap over Holy Power, you use it. This does also mean that we may see situations where our Soulbinds for M+, we might see something like Merilith, and we may use Truth Wake going into Mythic+, but if we use Mythic+, we may see a different build here with Zeal, Imperium Power, still Divine Purpose, maybe Seraphim, because the big part with this whole maybe shifting off Seraphim is with Art of War proccing, we're going to get Seraphim for 2 seconds, and over the course of a long fight, if it extends Seraphim when we use it normally, then fantastic. We might have extended Seraphims lasting 20, maybe even 22, 24 seconds if the procs are with us and we can fish for them, remembering that Zeal increases our attack speed. Your next 3 auto attacks occur 30% faster and deal additional holy damage. And if we do look to our spellbook, we can see that Art of War as a passive. There we are. Your auto attacks have a 12% chance to reset the cooldown of Blade of Justice. We essentially fish for procs. Now, if we were to go Blade of Wrath, Zeal, again, we are fishing, and our auto attacks now have a 24% chance to reset the cooldown of Blade of Justice. These procs may result, especially while Wings is up, may result in these longer extended Seraphims, which is great, and Seraphim might in itself become a major cooldown for us. But at the same time, if it doesn't, then we're actually less likely to want to use Seraphim itself because it wastes holy power, and we may just want to funnel in to Divine Purpose so that we can maintain Righteous Verdict, for single target anyway. because in testing yesterday on stream, I maintained 97% uptime on Final Verdict and Righteous Verdict, so my damage was much higher. I say much higher, my sustain was much higher. So current playstyle is obviously peaks and troughs, and Necrolord seemed relatively low and didn't have as much high of a peak, but it certainly didn't have as low of a trough. So if we take the kind of build without Seraphim for the time being with Righteous Verdict, and we just quickly go through what I suspect might be a playstyle. We'll go until Wings comes back, so this will be a 2-minute stint of me just smacking a target dummy. You can feel free to skip this part and we'll go over the analysis afterwards. Or you can just sit and watch as I mash my buttons as we go through this. But you can see there that I got a Divine Purpose proc. I'm making use of Vanquish's Hammer as it comes up, so I am getting the debuff from my Oozling, and we're just going through this. Hammer of Wrath resets, so we're getting prejudgments, and the playstyle itself is kind of going, and all these Art of War procs could be Wake resets and whatever else. So playing as though we're not holding anything for Wake of Ashes, that's another Art of War proc, so we could have just had a Templar's Verdict or a Wake proc into that, into another Verdict, keeping the rotation going. And it already plays relatively smooth as a Necrolord. Paladin. Vanquish's Hammer definitely smoothing out quiet parts within our global, and also Divine Purpose is giving us these procs for free Templar's Verdicts. So, playing pretty nice. Still making use of the hammer, and just slowly going through the rotation. It's more of a methodical, almost flowing rotation. Obviously, one thing to say about this particular build is because it was more reliant on constantly having uptime and playing through things, it does mean that if there are fights with mobility in the next raid, we may actually see it, and we will cease there because Wings is back up. So we've had a 2-minute encounter, and if we quick look at auras, Righteous Verdict, which is the Templar's Verdict, increases the damage of your next Templar's Verdict by 15% for 6 seconds. We had that up for 93% of the entire encounter. So 2 minutes 7 seconds, and the fight length was 2 minutes and 16 seconds. Kevin's Aid, which is the capstone trait for Marileth, which Vanquish's Hammer summons Kevin Oozling to fight alongside you for 10 seconds. His attacks cause your enemies to take 6% additional damage from you, and he periodically grants allies an Absorb Shield. The Absorb Shield is nice, nothing too huge, but having Kevin's Oozling out for 40 seconds, with Kevin's Aid being the defensive shield, means that we had it out for 29%. Remember that I don't have the second charge of Vanquish's Hammer, so you could pretty much double that to be 1 minute 20, or nearly 60% of the fight, which is 60% of an extra 6% flat damage onto the target. Now, that's all well and good if Blizzard's intention is for us to play a more sustained build. But if Blizzard are trying to look at improving our representation and help us in other ways, I think giving us the Holy Power isn't necessarily going to do it. I don't think that that is the answer, because it is RNG on top of RNG. And one of the big things from a player perspective is obviously how it feels. It's not going to feel great for us if we go from one particular fight where we get proc after proc after proc, and you have maybe a chain of 2 or 3 Wake of Ashes relatively close to each other, and then you go through a state of 6 or 7 Art of War procs, and you never once get a Wake reset. And from a player point of view as well, whether or not Seraphim extends based on the Art of War procs with the 2 set anyway, we're not really going to feel it unless you do try and do the seal twisting playstyle where you are trying to game around your weapon swing timers. Now, unlike Classic and TBC, we can't hunt for really, really slow 2-handed weapons. They're all universal. 3.6 seconds. 3.6 for another 2-hander. Rhymed Blade, 3.6. Yeah, like it's just a uniformed attack speed. And Zeal, although fishing for Art of War procs could be beneficial, it's going to make it harder to manage and to maximize, which for the very, very top end red players and myself who will try and get there, might bring in a level of skill difficulty, but I imagine more often than not, we're likely to just see it ignored or just treated as great. Next ability is buffed in some way, shape, or form. The other side of it is the fact that a lot of players actually like playing the execution sentence build. And from a playing perspective, forcing that change, because nothing feels worse than having an ability reset or have an ability come off cooldown and you hold it, because that's what we'd have to do. The other alternative is, depending on how numbers obviously pad out, it may be a case of we just no longer care about using Wake within our main cooldowns, and we end up in this rather weird situation of having essentially 2 different sets of cooldowns. So we have, if we still play Kyrian, it may be a case of Execution Sentence, Divine Toll, Final Reckoning, and Wings, and then Seraphim, it gets used in the big one with Wings, but then outside of Wings, it gets used whenever it comes off cooldown, and Wake of Ashes is just its own ability now. Where if we can fit it into our burst window, great. If we can't, which changes the way a lot of people think, given how we have played so far in Shadowlands. And that's concerning. Obviously, this is only data mined and can be subject to change, because we do have months and months yet before it goes live. But I kind of wanted to talk about my speculation with the whole Necrolord side of things. Just a note though, in terms of Mythic Plus and how it may change, because I was discussing how a second set of talents could work. And don't know why I was clicking on all of those. I do apologize. And the other set of talents, looking more at the M plus side of things, would be we'd run Zeal, potentially run Sanctified Wrath, and then either Divine Purpose or Seraphim. Notice how Blade of Wrath stays the same. And this is the concern. The concern from an M plus perspective is the fact that it forces us to take Blade of Wrath over Imperium Power, even in a multi-target situation, because we are fishing for Art of War procs. Because having Wake of Ashes reset more frequently, because even though it's a 50% chance, going back through these logs, so if we pick 2 fights that are roughly the same length, buffs. So if we scroll down to the Art of War, they had the Kyrian that we chose had 28 procs of Art of War. Our Necrolord of choice had also 28 procs. So working on the assumption that that's 50 or that's 14 resets, treating it as a perfect 50%, 14 extra Wake of Ashes, that's 42 extra Holy Power, or more easily, 3 more or 14 more spenders in Templar's Verdict with it being a single target encounter, and or 14 more Divine Storms if this was a trash fight. I will make a comment in my next Mythic Plus that I do, or make a note of how many Art of War procs I got throughout the dungeon, because you can track that with details, because it'll be buff applications or refreshes, because there may be something to keep track of as well that will enable me to work out how that might be. Because if Imperium Power is all well and good in that it's a free Divine Storm, however, Crusader Strike has a 15% chance to make your next Divine Storm free and deal 25% additional damage. That's great, but will that compete with the 100% more chance to reset or to proc Art of War, therefore making it 100% or doubling our chances of resetting Wake of Ashes, which in and of itself will give us a Divine Storm afterwards, paired with our Tempest of the Lightbringer Legendary, and then also paired with our Legendary of choice. So going back to the legendaries, powers, no, Shift J. I need to learn these keybinds off by heart. I'm just making a fool of myself. So Duty Bound Gavel, unlike Divine Toll that just throws judgments out, Vanquish's Hammer gains an additional charge and increases, and an additional cast of Templar's Verdict will automatically trigger Divine Storm. Now, Vanquish's Hammer is a 30-second cooldown and it generates a Holy Power, which means that we can cast Templar's Verdict and we get a free Divine Storm out of it anyway. So for 3 Holy Power, we get 2 spenders, 1 single target and 1 AoE. Pair that with Art of War, proccing and the Wakes of Ashes and things like that, we're likely to get so many Divine Storms out over the course of a dungeon anyway that we may not need Imperium Power anymore, which means that this particular build, whether it be Sanctified Wrath or Final Reckoning at the moment, is still going to be completely up to the air and down to the Sims. I suspect we may see Sanctified Wrath show purely because of the amount of Holy Power spenders that we can get out over Final Reckoning, and is more of the sustain option. Also, there is potentially Crusade because of haste, but I don't think we'll see that. I feel like we will probably still have more Sanctified Wrath for the extension and or Minor Burst period. But I do definitely see Zeal, Unrighteous Verdict, and Blade of Wrath pretty much becoming our go-to, which is kind of horrifying. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Hopefully this has been a video that has kind of helped you guys and you can kind of see where I'm coming from. But I will resume the usual stuff and try and get back to doing the 20 reviews and hopefully get those out in the next couple of days. I'll catch you tomorrow during stream and hope you have a good weekend. Take care, folks.